Hello and welcome to the second digital React Native London Meetup. So this is the May edition of our Meetup. Thank you as always to Pusher for recording this for us. It wouldn't be possible for these digital meetups to happen without them. So briefly, I'll just run through the format of this evening. We've got two talks and we'll have live Q&As and discussions afterwards. We got a little bit of a delay, but if you put any questions in the chat, we'll be able to ask them to the speakers. The first talk we have is with Julian and Mike, and they're talking about how they built a COVID tracking app at Zoe, and it's about how they went from kind of learning React Native to in production with 1 million users in less than a week, which is no mean feat and not something I want to try myself. So I'll be hearing about their journey and let us know if you've got any questions for them. And then we'll be hearing from Peter, who will be talking about unifying React Native. So originally React Native was just unifying maybe Android, iOS, but now we see it across so many different platforms. And I'll be talking about some of the recent developments and how that's enabled us to spread even across even more platforms. So look forward to these two great talks this evening. And without any further ado, let's get into the first talk.
Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about the COVID Symptom Study app, and especially how at Zoe we went from having very little experience of React Native to shipping an app used by more than 1 million people in about 6 days. So this talk is really a case study. We're not expert in React Native, but we want to share with you our journey, what we learned, what worked well, and why we think that ultimately that was a good decision for us to build that app with React Native. So who am I? My name is Julian. I'm VP of Engineering at Zoe. And my co-speaker today will be Mike Davis. Mike will join us for the Q&A, but I will do the talk myself. And Mike is a software engineer. That's one of the main person behind our app. So Zoe, before working on the COVID symptom study app, we are, after all, a nutritional science company. And basically, we're on a mission to try to help people to eat with confidence. And the chart that you can see here is very interesting because for the last 2 years, we've basically done a lot of nutritional study. And one of the things we found out is that all of us respond very, very differently to food. So in that case, we're measuring the blood sugar response, which is the level of sugar you have in your blood after eating a meal. And you can see there is almost like a eightfold difference between the people at the bottom and the people at the very top. And so that's the core of what Zoe has been building for the last couple of years. So fundamentally, we believe that food is the most important medicine we take. And we're building a product around that that should be available to people later in the year. And we also basically the world largest nutritional science program about measuring response to food. And we've been working with a lot of people, and that is actually quite relevant for the work we did very recently with the COVID Symptom Study app. So we've been working with people from KCL, Harvard, Stanford, Massachusetts General Hospitals, and Twins UK. So that brings me to the COVID Symptom Study app. So for those of you that have never heard of it, it's an app that was released about 2 months ago, primarily in the UK, then the US, and then Sweden. And the principles are very, very simple. We ask you to report your symptoms on a daily basis, whether you're feeling well or unwell. And if you're feeling unwell, we ask you quite a lot of questions about what kind of symptoms you have. Are you coughing? Do you have fever? Do you have a hoarse voice? Have you lost the sense of smell? And basically that information is collected, and we've got a lot of people are participating in this science project, basically. So this information is collected and then sent for analysis, both by teams internal to Zoe, but also teams at KCL, MGH, and other university. And that information is also now disseminated to the government, to the authorities, to the NHS. And that has been extremely useful for understanding better the COVID symptoms. And we made some very interesting discoveries about what are the symptoms that predict whether you have COVID or not, but also just understanding the spread of the virus. This project basically all started, as I said, about 2 months ago. And Tim Spector, which is also one of the founders of Zoe, is a professor of genetic epidemiology at King's College and working for something called Twins UK. And Twins UK is actually the biggest database of twins in the UK. Twins are quite interesting because basically they allow you to analyze genetic factors, so you can compare how people, how twins react to different things. And in our case, we're working with him on the nutrition side of things. So about 2 months ago, basically reached out to us, and since Twins UK was going to be shut down for the lockdown, started to ask us, could you build an app for us for understanding a bit better how COVID-19 works, and we could use the Twins registry as a way to learn something very, very specific about COVID that other people could not do. So we said, yeah, sure, we would really love to help. We're like everybody else in the same boat with COVID. So if there is something we can do, let's try to do that. Great. And then Tim asked us, could I have this app, literally tomorrow evening? Which say, okay, let's give it a try. So obviously, generally, you would take weeks or months to build an app like that. But with COVID-19, we don't have that time. So we really needed to build something extremely quickly. And that's basically how this project started. And this project that started initially with just building an app for the 15,000 people who are part of the Twin registry quickly became, well, actually, this app could work for everybody. So we should release it to the general public. And, if there is an uptake, great. If there is not, then, that's not too bad. We've tried. So we basically had assembled a team at that point, which was, kind of hackathon style. We had 2 React Native engineers working on the front end, or kind of, because one of those was myself, and I'm actually I've not been writing a lot of code for the last few years, and certainly have not been writing any mobile app. 2 backend engineers, both working on the actual code for the backend, but infrastructure to run it. 1 product designer is coming up with all the design for the screen and thinking about the flow, and our CEO Jonathan Wolf was also very involved, both in the flow, but also covering all the legal aspects, which are very complicated for a product like that. So we assembled that team on the 19th of March, which was basically when we've discussed this idea with Tim and KCL, and we started at lunchtime. And as I said, the goal was to have an app working literally 36 hours later. One of the reasons we wanted to go fast is, as I said, because COVID-19 cannot wait, but also because we were anticipating that getting it through the store review process would be a bit difficult. So in about 36 hours, we actually had the first app. I think we've pushed it towards midnight on the Friday night. And we went through the store submission process, and quickly we find out that Google and Apple were also in a bad situation with COVID-19, and therefore the time they needed to review was upwards of 1 week. So that didn't work for us. So we actually spent a lot of time during the weekend, not only adding features, but also reaching out to our network and trying to get through the approval process. Especially everything COVID-19 related is quite controlled on those platforms with good reasons. So we had to do quite a lot of paperwork with KCL to prove to them that this project was actually, a real research project with ethic approval, which is needed for any kind of serious research. And basically, on the Monday, we finally got our approval and we're ready to launch the next day. So next day, we've launched at about 9 a.m., mostly by Tim reaching out to his network and tweeting. And the thing just ballooned during the day. And by the end of the day, we had about 200,000 people using the app. The next day, at about 8 a.m. in the morning, our backend kind of blew up under load because there was just too many people trying to sign up. The press in general caught up with the ID, and by the end of the day, we had about 1 million users of the app. A few days later, we launched in the US. A lot smaller scale, but still quite a lot of work to do and still very valuable. Then we released like a lot of additional features to the app. Some of those were kind of UX improvements. A lot of those were adding new questions because our understanding is evolving constantly. So basically every week we had a set of new questions, whether they're about your symptoms or medical histories. And then more recently, we launched in Sweden. Sweden is quite an interesting country because they didn't have any lockdown. So comparing the stats between the UK and Sweden might be very interesting. And then in parallel to that, there was obviously a lot of research done by a great team at both KCL and Zoe and other places. And that culminated very recently to a research paper published in Nature Medicine, which is one of the best science journals out there. So it has been a very exciting journey, and the team at Zoe and KCL have been like extremely busy, working around the clock to not only support the app, launch new feature, but also kind of promote it and do the research around it. But yeah, to go back to my initial point, something that is really, really unique to this app, I don't think it was achieved that many times, that we literally went from an idea to an app used by 1 million users in less than a week. So a very exciting journey, not without a roller coaster of emotions. So today we have about 3.5 million users at the time of recording, and more than 1 million users are reporting their symptoms daily. We're publishing daily map of the virus every day on our website, so you can know how the UK is doing. We're doing similar things in the US and Sweden, but that's just not publishing them daily. As I mentioned, we've got like quite a few research papers that have got published. Some of the main discovery that were made is that cough and fever are actually just one of symptoms that could tell you you've got COVID. Actually, I think there's about 6 different groups of symptoms. And one of the most interesting one is actually anosmia, which is the loss of smell or taste. This is the one symptoms that predict better whether you have COVID. So about 2/3 of the people that have confirmed COVID actually have loss of smell or taste. So if you're one of those people, it's definitely time to go and see your doctor. And then in the last month, we also got endorsed by NHS Scotland and Wales that are actually encouraging the population to use the app to report their symptoms, not only for research, but also because it's a great tool for understanding the spread of the virus, so that you can prepare the hospitals better. And that's particularly relevant because we are leading indicators versus hospital admissions. So the numbers of people who think have COVID would increase first in our stats, then hospital admission would start to increase too, and then sadly a couple of weeks later death. So we're very happy with all of that stuff. So that brings me to Zoe and React Native. So for us, the pre-COVID era, the kind of project we're doing, were on nutrition, and we had 2 apps. One was used for managing our studies, so something that study participants would use to report, to log their meals. That would be some kind of task list, so that we tell them on that date they need to do those things, because being part of a study is like a very specific protocol. And we've got a second app that is more about showing some kind of results based on the test you did. We can tell you, how good some food would be for you personally. So second app really about nutrition, food, and informing you. And those two apps were developed full native, one in Swift, one in Kotlin. So that's basically for code base. This had one big problem, which is a very low bus factor, obviously a lot of rework, but also lack of flexibility in the sense when you just have one engineer that can do the work on one platform. If you want to really push forward one on the other, or if you just want to go faster, it's not that easy. And we certainly found that getting a non-mobile engineer to learn a mobile environment with Swift or Kotlin is not like an easy task. So we actually had our Android engineer that started working on Swift to kind of speed up the development over iOS. But yeah, that definitely took him several weeks to start reaching a point where he was able to work by himself. So that led us to think about React Native, and basically we started to conduct an experiment, which was, can we rewrite our Android app with React Native? And the reason we chose our Android app is because at some point, as I said, our Android engineer switched to iOS because we wanted to go faster on iOS, because there was no point having two apps being exactly the same. We were basically not learning twice as much. So we've decided to bet everything on iOS just to iterate faster. So at that point, the Android version was lagging quite significantly. So we decided to run that experiment with two developers, our Android engineers, which was loading a third platform, and another engineers that joined us a couple of weeks before that and had a bit of experience with React Native, having worked with it for a year as a sole developer. And the goal was to work for about 6 weeks and see how far we could go with rebuilding the app, and especially learn about what is easy and what is hard. So not just redo the app as is, but trying to see what would be the things that would bite us ultimately. All of that was great, and basically at that point, 3 weeks into the experiment, we've basically aborted it just because we've switched everybody to the COVID Symptom Study app. So at that point, we chose React Native because there was no way we would be able to build an iOS version, a Kotlin version of the COVID Symptom Study app in 36 hours. That was just not achievable. So, based on our experience, we were quite convinced that we could build something quite quickly with React Native that would work cross-platform. Obviously, it was like a massive bet because we just didn't have any production experience with it. But we've embraced it, and, we tried to just, take the paved road. So, use Expo with the managed workflow, TypeScript, because that's something we're using in our experiment too, and we're quite opinionated about the fact that having some static typing was something worth doing. React Native navigation, native base for components, Formic for managing forms, and a few other libraries. I think one of the key things there that we did is just we didn't try to find what was the best solution for each of those. We basically picked, the most obvious one, like, almost the first search, Google search results, because we just didn't have time, right? We just needed to move super fast. So just took whatever we're playing with for experiment, not trying to double guess, what was the best solution. What went well with this bold experience? Well, the first thing is that we shipped like super fast. As I said, in 36 hours, we had a first version. It was not great by any means, but we did have a first version of the app. And we did take a lot of shortcuts, like the first version of the app that was published a few days later, for example, didn't have password reset. It was like something that was definitely missing and requested by a lot of people. The other thing that went very well is that, when you learn about React Native, you're mostly interested by shared code base, and our experience has been, yes, we've shared almost everything into code base. There's a few places where there is an if for Android and iOS, but that's very, very minimal. And that's super important because we don't have a great QA process. So, being able to have this kind of shared code base and mostly the bugs that you're going to have, they're going to hit the two is extremely useful. So we still have some rendering differences between iOS and Android, but they tend to be on the margin, not something absolutely used. And it's pretty easy for us to actually detect those and fix those. And the third thing that went very well is onboarding web developers. So literally we had two engineers that were familiar with React that never done any mobile engineering before. We asked them to start working in the code base. 24 hours later, they were productive. And that's really amazing. And that's in the context where ourselves, the other people working on the code base were themselves not expert, right? So it's really easy for someone knowing React to switch to writing React Native. If we zoom a bit on Expo, the other thing that worked very well are over-the-air updates. That was actually one of the reasons we're also considering React Native for our kind of nutrition app. And that saved us many, many times. Notification setup was super simple. We forgot about FCM setup initially on Android, but when we found out about that took us just a couple of hours to set it up, and that was very convenient because again, Expo gives you an abstraction, and you can basically reach Android and iOS very easily through that mechanism. And we still haven't need to eject from Expo even 2 months later. So there's probably a point at which we'll need to do that, but actually Expo is covering a lot of features, and that makes our life a lot easier. But there's also things we struggle with. I think one of the key problem we have is that we're still not sure 2 months later what is good React Native. We basically took a lot of shortcuts. We tried to ship an app as quickly as possible, and there's definitely things we probably didn't do well. So for example, one of the debates we didn't have and now are starting to have is whether we should use hooks or not. So we started without hooks, just with class components. And we did realize after the fact that actually the whole community is moving towards hooks. So that's probably something we should start integrating in our code base. Another thing that we kind of struggle with is how to style and reuse components. So we tend to have style sheets that are recreated for every single screen. And component reuse is quite small. So again, that's definitely some best practice there that we did not follow. And the last thing is a kind of CI/CD setup. So the nice thing about over-the-air updates is that they exist and you can push an update without doing native builds, but that also makes your whole process a lot harder to set up. And it wasn't clear to us at the beginning, when we needed to do over-the-air updates versus when we needed to push new native builds. Again, if we zoom a bit on specificities of Expo, so over-the-air updates are amazing, but the defaults are not necessarily what you want. So, for example, the default is basically the update would be asynchronous on startup. But if you want to kind of strongly encourage people to use the latest version of your app, and if your app, like ours, is basically something that you use only once a day, you probably want to make it synchronous on startup, at least to some degree. So we changed that, but it took us a few weeks to really understand what was the update behavior. Credentials management for CI/CD through Expo at some point was just entirely broken, and they fixed it and have been extremely responsive, but that really slowed us down, and we just struggled as part of the automation. And as I mentioned, one of the big questions we were asking ourselves is, when do you actually need a native release? So the documentation on Expo was not entirely clear. Now we understand it a bit better, but there's also some other consideration, which is it's actually quite nice to push a new native build, because that means you're kind of guaranteed to start from the known state for people who are installing the app. Whereas if you don't force update on startup, they could still have a version from a couple of weeks ago with maybe not all the questions that you're now asking. There are definitely things we did not explore and that we feel are quite important. So animations is definitely something we did not invest in, but it's pretty clear from our experience that you can have a pixel perfect UI, and we have some screens that are actually, I wouldn't say they're beautiful, but they're certainly, not your classical Android or iOS components. And everything related to native integrations is also not something that we had to do. As I said, we're still using the Expo managed workflow. So some of the things that also surprised us was that actually React Native works. Like obviously Facebook would not use it if it did not work, but we're a bit worried that at scale you would have a lot of edge cases and a lot of issues, and actually that mostly doesn't happen. So we've got 3 million devices that are using our app, and our crash rate is actually super reasonable. And I've talked to people working at Google Play, for example, to confirm how we benchmark against other apps, and it's actually quite good. So something definitely quite happy. Shared code base was always an objective, but there was always this doubt that whether you can have a lot of if-else statement, and actually there's not. And the third thing that is actually very important is none of our top issues are related to React Native. We were wondering whether we would end up in a situation where something don't work, or lots of edge cases. And actually, no. The big problem we have are our UX is not good. Some features needs improvement. Or backend sometimes is not stable because we've got sudden traffic spike. Like nothing is fundamentally related to React Native. There's nothing so far that was like totally blocking. So anyway. Thank you very much for listening to our story, and we'll take Q&A. There's a few things I want to share with you before leaving, which is, hey, you can contribute to the code base. We've made it open source, so please give us a hand if you feel that's important. And we'll do our best to integrate all those pull requests, but we're still not great at managing open source project, but we're learning, so please help. And we are looking for people to help us, building that app, not just on a pro bono basis, but actually be part of Zoe and work both on this product and the nutrition product. So thank you very much. Download the app if you're not already self-reporting, because that's important. That's helping the NHS and advancing the science. Have a good day, everybody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A part. If you've got any questions, ask them in the chat, and I will ask them to the speakers. We've got Julian and Mike here from Zoe, who made the app, and we've got Peter as well, who's giving the second talk. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for the live Q&A. First of all, I'm going to say, thank you for making this app. It's amazing that you guys have made this. And how are you feeling now? Is it any less stressful now, or is it you still feeling that wave, that rush still from the beginning? Oh,
either one of you. This one. It was hectic in the first couple of days because we're building an app in 24 hours, 48 hours, getting onto the iTunes stores and getting it running. But that's only the start. Now, every single time we make a mistake, we get thousands of people emailing us saying, your app is broken, your app's collecting the wrong details. So every mistake you make is now magnified by so much. So it is less stressful in terms of time, but you're always at the edge of your seat whenever you deploy a new change, wondering whether there's going to be a stream of complaints or whether it's going to be nicely quiet.
So those issues just feel so much bigger now then.
It is. Right,
we've got one question in the chat so far already. They said, can you talk a little bit about the kind of backend you have? So a bit about the backend, not the React Native side, but...
I guess I'll take that one. So our backend is actually not particularly exciting. It's written in Python with a framework called Django, which is your classical framework to do kind of REST services and talking to a database. Database is actually Postgres, SQL, and all of that is running on GCP. And back to the previous question, so Mike worries about all the mistakes we can make on the mobile app, and I worry about the backend not blowing up every day. Which is quite interesting when our founders actually does TV quite a lot. So sometimes you have traffic spike that literally goes from some number to 5 times that numbers in 30 seconds. So even GCP cannot rescale fast enough. So you have to make interesting choice in terms of whether you spend a lot of money for those or not, and just wait 2 minutes for the auto scaling to happen.
Yeah, it's big traffic when you're running into cloud provider scaling issues. How was that integration? I mean, that's common for us as our React Native and our Django as well at Theodo, but how did you guys find that integration? Was that set up quite easily then? Or did it take much work for you guys to set up compared to, say, a React app, or was it fine?
So I think from our perspective, Django has been our setup for forever. And before we're not doing React Native, we were doing full native. So it's not very different from what we're doing. So we're pretty happy with that. We're not experienced with things such as GraphQL, so can't really compare the two. But yeah, otherwise, it's just a normal backend exposing a few endpoints of a REST. The thing that is interesting about our app is that it's mostly write, which is very untypical. You record your symptoms, you record your health condition, but actually there is very little feedback. So it may actually make things quite a lot easier for us.
Cool. We've got another few more questions in the chat now. Luke's asked, did you or your stakeholders have any reservations about deploying the MVP before it was fully ready? Like, were they worried about the bad feedback or anything like that deploying so quickly?
Go ahead, Mike. This one is for you.
I'd say no. They were all behind us because we know time is of the essence. That if we can get an app out there that's just working, even though its basic functionality is there, that would be something that we don't have right now. We could spend 7 weeks testing on the Isle of Wight and get nowhere near the audience we need to. So criticality was more important than, as long as it worked, it didn't matter. As long as it worked and collected data, the data is the key. Once we have the data, then we can start making predictions and assumptions and start to figure out what's happening with the virus in this country.
No, it's amazing that your stakeholders had that MVP mindset as well. So you touched on the Isle of Wight, so I was going to ask this as well. Any thoughts on how this relates to the current contact tracing app, or what interaction that will have with yours?
You go, Julian.
Yeah, sorry. I think ultimately we would like the contact tracing app to succeed, because if it does succeed, that will be good for the country. We're a bit unclear what will be the interactions. I think it's taking them quite a lot of time to roll out the app. It's not entirely clear. I mean, I'm not very close to that, but it's not entirely clear if it's going to work, because people have a lot of privacy concerns. And we saw that ourselves. We saw that even though we don't have any kind of features like tracing like that, people generally do care. That's the number one thing on their mind. So we're not totally clear if they're going to succeed. If not, we'll be there. If they replace us and cover all our features, then great, good. If it's good for the country, no problem. But the other thing is that we're targeting something a bit different, which is fundamentally our app is about collecting data for research, whereas fundamentally their app is about contact tracing. So the two are not entirely the same.
That's really, really interesting. We've got a question here from Jeremy, who asked, what are you using for testing? And was it one of the things that got skipped, like the forgotten password feature?
Yes, it did get skipped, like the reset your password. Thanks for that. That was our biggest bugbear on launch, was we can't change our password a minute after filling it in, which happens. So our testing is essentially us developer testing, and we have a small QA team that iterates through some of the critical paths to make sure they're still working. So it is largely manual right now. That's one of the problems of having as little experience as we had with React Native, is knowing what the right tools are for testing, for unit testing, for integration testing. So we just didn't have the time to learn up about that, figure out what to be using. So we just ran with what we had, with the skills that we had.
Has that changed?
We do accept contributions.
Yeah.
Has that changed since then, or is it still the same now then?
We have a few open source contributions coming in that are starting to put some snapshot testing into our app, which has given us some degree of confidence. So the tests we have are now running on a Git commit. So we have the test coverage is nowhere near there, but it's a start. It can only get better. And as Julian says, contributions are welcome to help us make this a bit more robust.
And I think the second thing to give more context to people is that obviously Zoe core business is not building the COVID symptom study app, right? So one of the big challenges that we have is we've diverted like a massive amount of resource to that, like 80% of the engineering team. Now we're trying to get people back to do stuff that eventually will help us have a business that succeeds. So unfortunately, we have quite a lot of trouble right now to spend enough time on making this app great quality, which is back to the point about why we're trying to open source it and see if some people want to help us and contribute.
Amazing. We got another question in the chat which says, how long does it take to App Store to review and publish in its first version? I know there's something a lot of people worry about, and who knows, I've heard wild speculations from it can take as long as 2 or 3 weeks. How did you guys find that process?
We ran out of patience after about 2 days, and we got everybody in the company to contact anybody we knew to try and push things along. But it was 2 to 3 days. But because it's a COVID app, the requirements are also a lot more stringent. So we need to have ethics approvals. You can't just put a COVID app out there without some sort of ethics approval about the data you're collecting, because it is personal sensitive information. So, but we had all the paperwork in line. We have the contacts with King's College London. So the ethics permissions, being able to prove we had the permission was easy enough. So it was just waiting for the normal process. So about 2 to 3 days.
Amazing. One of the things I'd like to touch on myself was you guys using Expo. How did you find that? Because that can often be a bit of a controversial and polarized community. Some people say it doesn't scale, but you guys have proven that it scales to, well, over 3 million users. How have you found using that? And is it the way forward for you guys if you continue using React Native?
When you have an app that doesn't require native modules that Expo doesn't support, Expo is fantastic as a starting point. So for us with the COVID app is we wanted to stay within Expo for as long as possible, and we intend to try and do that. So working within Expo's limitation was something that we were perfectly comfortable with. And I've had experience with it before, so I know how to do the builds and do the App Store builds. So it was just reusing what we already knew. So didn't have a problem with Expo. I'd still recommend it as a way to get started, particularly if you don't need those native hybrid type applications.
Amazing. Well, we've got one from Peter. Do you want to ask you a question yourself, Peter?
Yeah, sure. I didn't want to interrupt. So knowing what you know now about React Native, do you think you can build it even faster?
That's a kind of debate internally. I'll give you the view of the VP of engineering, and then Mike can give you the view of the software engineer actually, typing the code. I'm not sure we are significantly better at writing React than we were 2 weeks ago. We're a bit better, but not like by 2x. However, I think the big difference is that now we're really, really aware that we could be a lot better. And again, it's kind of, how do you spend the time where you've got scientists and everyone asking you for new questions, and we're doing stuff with the government. They're also asking stuff. So you've got these constant streams of of features and things you want to add, and it's hard to carve time. But I'm totally convinced that we could by spending like a couple of weeks, like purely in terms of what are the right practice and refactoring a bit the code base, that after that we could be 2 times faster, if not more.
From the developer's perspective, sure. Yeah. With the developer perspective, I don't think we could have built it faster, because we were working at a period where time was of the essence. And I don't think our approach would have changed that much, because when we are pushed for pressure, we tend to fall back into what we're comfortable with rather than picking up new things. If we had like a 2 or 3 months more experience, maybe that would be change the question. But it's also, we were cutting corners as much as possible to get the early release in. And the case of MVP is, are you embarrassed by what you released? Because that's the tell of MVP. And yes, I was very embarrassed. I was expecting Apple to just reject it based on quality. So I don't think we would have done it any differently. And I'm quite proud of what we've done in that time.
Amazing. Great question. We've got another one in the chat here, which is said, did you ever consider building it as a PWA? I mean, you guys said you didn't have loads of React Native experience. Did you ever consider not using React Native and doing it in something else?
No, we knew we wanted it on mobile, so we very, very briefly considered native and thought, no, let's just do it with React Native. React Native is one of our it's one of our ideas that can it save us time in the long run? I'm sure Julian will follow up with a lot more detail on that. But PWAs didn't come into there because we wanted an app someone could download from the App Store, because there needs to be the air of verifiability and validity. There needs to be like a brand associated with it, and having it on the Play Store and the iOS App Store gave us a stamp of authenticity I don't think we could have got with a PWA.
That's very true.
I would add, notifications is definitely a key feature. I mean, you can have some level of notification with web, but it's certainly not as well integrated in the operating system, and that made like a massive difference. When we turned on notifications, suddenly we saw like a lot more returning users. And simply, I'm just not aware of any web app out there that basically does what we do at the scale that we do. So I think that back to what Mike was saying, there is definitely a case for all the authenticity attached to having an app like that.
One of the earlier questions from the chat asked, did you have to, with you now as well in the US and Sweden, did you have to separate out the data between regions, or how have you handled that?
So we've not separated the data between regions. It's all stored in one tenant. That's basically a question we ask ourselves, and we went also a bit further than that, which is, should we even have different apps entirely? But ultimately, that's again the same problem, which is if you had 6 months to think about that and build all the infrastructure around it, you would definitely separate everything. We don't, so we decided to just have all the data in one tenant. And what we're super careful about is actually the export mechanism. But some of our partners in the US also have access to anonymized data in the UK because, again, we're not, the people are not just looking at their country in isolation. There is value in checking what is the behavior between countries. And Sweden is a perfect example because ultimately, Sweden has a very different approach than other European country because there just wasn't any lockdown. So being able to actually double check the behavior across those two countries is super valuable to the researcher, and it would be a bit of a shame to say, hey, you only have access to Sweden data and not to UK data or the other way around. So not everybody has access to everything, but certainly some people do. And ultimately, when you reach that point, then it's not entirely clear that there is a very, very strong benefit in totally separating the data at the database level.
Amazing. Well, I think that's pretty much it for questions. And I think now we can launch into Peter's talk on unifying React Native everywhere. Thank you again, guys.
Hello, hello, hello. Hey, everyone. Sorry I can't be there today. Thank you for having me. I guess none of you all are there today, right? Because the office is closed and stuff. But thank you for having me anyway. I really miss London. I had such a great time when I came out there in August. Also spoke at React Native London back then. That was a really great opportunity to meet all of you, and we had a really good time afterwards. And I generally just miss it. So sad that I can't be there today, but super happy that thanks to technology, we can make this happen. And also thanks to taping my phone to the screen to make this recording higher quality. That's something that you can't see, but I'm throwing it out there. Anyway, today we'll be talking about unifying React Native across all platforms. Potentially a controversial topic, full of exciting information. We're going to talk about a little bit of Expo, a little bit of React Native, a little bit of Microsoft stuff, and a little bit of Reason, which I particularly always admire. Anyway, if you haven't heard of me, my name is Peter Pekarczyk. This is the photo that I used to use, and I still do, back when I had a beard. When I came to visit all of you, I did have a beard, but now I'm just sort of doing this clean-shaven, COVID-19 pandemic, locked in my house look. Going back to the topic, my last name is pronounced pies, cars, and chicks, right? It comes up all the time. How do you pronounce your last name? Pies, cars, and chicks. So that's a lot easier, right? I'm the co-founder and CTO of DraftBit, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm a Y Combinator alum, W18, Winter 18 batch. We started as Orchard and ended up pivoting to DraftBit, so crazy to think about it. It's been almost 2 years. I created Apollo query components via Apollo Toad a couple of years ago. So if you use query components, I played somewhat of a role in that. I'm Expo's first user, believe it or not. I love Reason and Reason React. I host the conference in Chicago, and I help contribute. And I also maintain and contribute a few popular JavaScript libraries that you may or may not have heard of. Anyway, so if you haven't heard of DraftBit, we help teams build mobile apps. The mobile apps that people build are really cool. And the mobile apps that we also build can be run as PWAs directly in the browser, right? So it's pretty cool. We just launched this new website on Webflow. Check it out if you haven't. It's actually really cool. We got all these like animations, kind of goes over, bringing your screens to life, all that marketing jazz that, that gets you excited. Anyway, I'm pretty proud of it because we just launched it. The source code that we generate for your apps is pretty high quality, right? So this whole like low code, no code thing is becoming pretty popular. But the difference between us and a lot of our competitors is that we still give you access to your source code. And that's a huge deal, right? A lot of the times these services are using templates or some form of that behind the scenes and just like plug and play your data. And that's great. But, for a tool as powerful as ours, we want you to be able to pass that off to, a different team or eject and work on whatever else you weren't capable of doing without having to throw out your source code. So we strive for making that source code super high quality. Now, I was watching my talk from August, and I just sort of stumbled over a screenshot of what the builder looked like back then, right? And this is about 2019, right? This toy that we had, right? Now I took a screenshot of what that looks like today. Check this out, right? Not only did we update the theme for whatever reason, but we are now a power tool, right? We went from being just a toy to a powerful power tool, right? This web preview works a lot better. We render fonts, we render your assets. You've got the ability to set any sort of prop from the React Native side directly in DraftBit. That's pretty powerful. Folks have been able to build their apps like from a sketch designer or whatever in a matter of hours. Yes, believe it, it's true. It's nuts. But anyway, enough about that selling pitch. Why am I here today? Well, so currently DraftBit targets two platforms, right? The web via PWAs, right? And then mobile, iOS and Android. We use the same API, but why can't we pursue other platforms? Well, we're not there yet. This is something that I'm personally just, looking into. I don't know much about it. I don't know what our users think of it, but I have discovered some really cool things that have come out in 2020, and I'd love to share those with you all today. The internet obviously has a lot of ideas too. So what you'll see is just sort of a collection of different things that folks are doing. And I'm going to try to keep things as objective as possible. But it gives you an idea of like some paths that you can pursue, right? So now, when it comes to building layouts, DraftBit supports everything under the sun, right? You can build your entire layout really, really quickly. So what's stopping us from turning this on? Well, we could, right? There is arguably nothing stopping you from building your Apple TV app inside DraftBit, but the reality is that nobody's asked for it yet, so it doesn't matter, right? Also, like a big proportion of that too, and a big portion of like all of, the problem behind this is that even though the primitives are the same, there are a lot of nuances between different platforms, obviously, right? We're used to specific experiences on iOS, on Android, on our Apple TV, our Xbox, our PlayStation, etc., right? So even though we might apply the same like declarative ideas, right, it doesn't necessarily play out the same way in practice, right? We like to keep our experiences the same. Now, the world has done a really good job of unifying iOS and Android so far, right? Sometimes we like to go down the specific, like I'm going to use Material UI because I'm building an Android app, or I'm going to use Hig because I'm building a iOS app. But there have been some really nice apps that were designed that work cross-platform, right? Now we're sort of entering this new phase where can we get that working on the web? Can we get that working on the desktop, right? We'll talk about a little more of that. Every once in a while, we hear this phrase like write once, run everywhere, right? You've heard like write once, use everywhere too, and that's sort of a derivative of this, right? And this is sort of a dream that we haven't realized, but may eventually realize. I've seen some clever techniques to make this happen, but we're far from, doing this in production. Very far from it, right? It's still, the reality is possible. We're just a couple of years away. And things that make this problem really, really hard are obviously different screen sizes, right? Stark difference between an iPhone and the Apple TV, right? That's like I have a 60-inch TV at home, right? And my Apple's like 6 inches. My iPhone is 6 inches. Different interactions, right? I interact with my phone with my finger by touching things and swiping. I use my web browser by using my mouse pad or just a normal mouse and scrolling, right? Or even your keyboard. My Xbox is a controller, right? Which is much different than either a mouse pad, keyboard, or swipe and touch, right? And then lastly, like I mentioned earlier, the different user experiences, right? I'm used to a certain experience on my Android machine. I'm used to a certain experience on Windows, and I'm used to a certain experience on iOS, right? The easiest example that I could come up with, like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this problem, is the date picker, right? We have different date and time pickers across Android and iOS. For whatever reason, opinions are always different. One could be better than the other. So on Android, we have this thing that sort of pops up, right? It's got the Material UI theme, right? And then that's what you use. On iOS, you have this inline date and time picker, right? It doesn't show up in a modal or a pop-up, right? It's inline. You can place it anywhere. So when React Native was first coming out, we had two separate and stark, vastly different APIs, right? The Android date picker was imperative, right? You would have to call a function that would then open it up, and the experience would be completely controlled, right? And then you get your date and time, you'd be done. On iOS, the date time picker was a component, right? A declarative component that would take a visible prop that would either show or hide. And then you have your on-change handler, right? So you'd have to manage the space of where that goes, as well as any type of pop-up if you wanted it there, right? Otherwise, it would just show up inline. Good and bad on both sides, right? But the community has made that easier, right? A great case study of how we can head towards the direction of cross-platform success is by unifying these experiences, right? The React Native community is fantastic. If you haven't seen it on GitHub, it's really nice, right? They offer a lot of different packages. Here, let me open this up. They offer a lot of different packages that will come in handy, right? The date time picker is one of them. Another really popular one that they have is Bob, right? Bob was a tool written by Satya that makes the process of scaffolding and building React Native apps, whether they're specifically to their native platforms or the web, right? They make it easy to build React Native libraries, right? No more handling of TypeScript or whatever that you need to do, or Babel or Flow. It just does it for you, right? The same way that, Microbundle or TSDX would do, right? When it comes to React Native community, there's also some exciting repos. Like if you've seen what's been going on in the React Native world lately, right, of making core smaller, a lot of those components are ending up here, right? Video, async storage, the date time picture, the camera, the web view, etc., right? So if you're looking for a place with really high quality components for React Native, definitely check out React Native community. Now, on the other end of that, Reason is also making this easier, right? If you haven't heard of Reason, Reason is this language that lets you write simple and type safe and very, very fast JavaScript-looking code. So it's got a JavaScript-like syntax with that's powered by the OCaml API, right? And so you can use Reason for a variety of different things. For web, for native, right? It compiles onto bytecode, right? Which means forget the JavaScript layer altogether. Give me a small bundle, and I'll talk about that in a second. There's also Reason React, right? So Reason was actually created by the creator of React, fun fact, right? And Reason React, the pitch there is a safer, simpler way to build React components, right? You get a great type system with an even better developer experience, right? And you can watch the video of Jordan Walk, the creator of React. Fun fact, the first talk that Jordan gave since releasing React in 2013. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so now a little bit about why Reason is making this easier, right? Like, how is this all coming together, Peter? Well, there's this tool called Reverie UI, right? And what Reverie UI is a library written in native Reason that compiles to the web and native desktop apps, right? Targeting Linux, Windows, and Mac OS with one code base. You can go across all those. React Native, iOS, Android derivative is in the works, right? But right now it's only that. So I've got this GIF right here, and as you can see, it's a little laggy, but that's not what it's like, right? This is a smooth animations running directly in the browser. They've got a lot of great examples too. Hover, calculator, whatever. They take a second to compile. It's definitely worth checking out. Ken Wheeler built this app called CamelSynth. I actually downloaded it, and it's blazingly fast. Like, did you see that? It opens up instantly, right? The nice thing about these apps is they're super small and they're very light on memory. An example of what that looks like is Jared Forsyth's Qmoji app, right? So we've all used the emoji data picker, or I think we have, or not just the emoji picker, right? I think it's Command Control Space or whatever it is, and you get the emoji picker. Well, he decided to rebuild that in Reason to see like what it's capable of, and he compared it against. There was a different version of it called Moji Bar, right? Moji Bar is an Electron app. Qmoji is a Reason app, right? Same exact style of code, right? Same exact functions. All it does is show you all the emojis and the ability to search for those. And it's quite snappy. It's very fast, and it works as a menu bar app. And then lastly, in terms of like cross-platform stuff, there's Unifying, right? And that's a text editor. It's written in Reason, powered by libvim, which is Vim under the hood, and it supports all of the VS Code language servers and extensions, right? So you get this really, really fast text editor that opens up immediately, right? That uses your favorite VS Code extensions. Definitely worth checking out. They're in an alpha. It's a paid product. It's $35, but I strongly recommend you taking a look. It's totally worth it. It's super fast. I love it. So how does all this compare to Electron, right? Before we get too far ahead, right, we're talking about like a completely different language that does a lot of different things that gives us some exciting results, right? So Electron apps are written in JavaScript, and what they do is they bundle up the entire Node engine, V8, right, which is a minimum of 120 megabytes. That means that if you wanted to build a simple Hello World app in Electron, the app would be at least 120 megabytes. Qmoji, on the other hand, right, which doesn't use Electron, is a measly 3.4 megabytes, right? And then it uses half the memory of Moji Bar too. That's pretty exciting, right? It's also worth pointing out that Electron apps don't mean React Native, right? They mean any type of JavaScript. For example, Atom and VS Code are written using Electron, but they don't use React, and that's okay. So when you want to compare Reverie and Reason to Electron, well, what they do is they compile to native bytecode. Your apps are small and fast, and they just work, right? There's no JavaScript layer that it needs to talk to. It strips all of that out while retaining the same structure. Oh, before I get too far ahead, I had this open. This is the website for Unifying. It's unifying.io. It's $35. It's really, really cool. They've got the public roadmap, right? It's actually someone from, I think the Microsoft TypeScript team. Don't quote me on that, but they switched over to using Reason and Reverie and built this amazing infrastructure for an editor. Anyway, so now moving on. What are our other options, right? So there's React Native Windows and Mac OS, right? So there's React Native Windows and then there's React Native Mac OS. And those do exactly what you think them to do, right? Interestingly enough, when I was working on this presentation, Microsoft just like unveiled an overhaul of React Native Windows, which is pretty cool. And what you can do, if it's not already obvious, use the React Native primitives to build desktop apps for Mac OS and Windows. There's still that JavaScript layer, right? That still lives there. But the nice part is the same exact primitives that you're used to apply to desktop apps. Now, I'm not a Windows person, but I know some of you are, right? You might be wondering, how is this different than a universal Windows platform? Well, the same way that React Native uses iOS and Android native components under the hood, React Native Windows uses Universal Windows Platform Components, UWP, under their hood, right? So the same idea, same characters with the bridge, but they just talk to different components under the hood, right? So it's a really cool and exciting project you should check out, especially if you want to build a Mac OS app. I've always wanted to do that, but obviously timing is rough. So maybe what I'll do is I'll take DraftBit, try to compile it to that using those primitives. Who knows? Okay, so another really cool demo that I've seen lately is Crossy Road. And what is Crossy Road? Crossy Road is an example of a game written using Expo Web, right? So maybe you've played this before, right? There's an Apple TV app for it. It's really cool. Check out those animations. Check out how smooth that is, right? So this works for native mobile or native iOS and Android, right? And it also works on the web with one code base, right? And that's because Expo has recently introduced support for PWAs, right? That means same code base, same APIs that work really nicely across different platforms, right? And the nice part about this is that they do a very good job of gracefully degrading the experience for APIs that don't exist on the web, right? We all know what the web is like, and we all know that native Android and iOS have better things like permissions and gyroscope and all these different things that we can't use on the web, right? And they do a very good job of making sure that your app doesn't crash, right? But you still get to use the same API. And how that works is Expo Web uses React Native Web, right? React Native Web is a library. Let's open this up. React Native Web is a library developed by Nicholas at Twitter. And what it does is it takes the React Native primitives and makes them work in the browser, right? And Twitter is a great example of a PWA. It's actually powered by React Native Web, right? It was actually pioneered at Twitter. So if you go to twitter.com on your browser or on your mobile phone, what it does is it opens up a PWA. It basically syncs and caches the app layer and then only fetches the data, right? So if you turn off your internet connection right now, Twitter would still be usable, right? You wouldn't get any new stuff, but it's not like that typical experience where everything just sort of fails, right? So it's one of the ways that we at DraftBit power our builder, right? We give you the live preview, center screen of what's going on in the web browser and also on your mobile phone. And we use some of that to power our own stuff. Okay, now Expo HTML elements was recently released, right? So what this is a component library that lets you use HTML elements like block quote and heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and blink and footer and all the HTML elements that you've heard of as React Native components, right? So you might be wondering, like, wow, another library, like, what do I do with this, right? Well, the nice thing about Expo HTML elements is that they will help you optimize your SEO and accessibility, right? Because they use the same primitives that the web offers, right? They compile and degrade nicely across native and iOS too. So here's an example of what that looks like. So you've got on the left-hand side snack.expo.io open, right, which is like a website, and you've got the phone running on the right-hand side, right? So it does this really nice job of putting together the header, the footer, the main title, article section, right? Like all just like native components. And so on the left-hand side is the HTML web experience, right? And so what Evan at Expo's done is apply that same concept to mobile, right? That's really, really cool. So if you want to know the differences between React Native Web and HTML elements, is like they're sort of reverse. So React Native Web brings view, text, image, and all those fun things to the browser, right? And HTML elements bring things like aside, an article, bold to native, right? Another really cool thing that Expo's done recently is universal authentication flows. And what this means is that you can write the same API for logging into Twitter, logging into GitHub, logging into whatever service that you want directly from using the same exact code base, right? And that's super, super cool. The docs are super well put together. As you can see here, I was like scrolling for a specific thing. Can't find it, but oh, here it is, right? So they offer everything from Coinbase, Apple, Facebook, Spotify, Slack, GitHub, Dropbox, Identity4, Uber, Reddit, Okta, Google. The list goes on, right? And now that experience will work on the web and on mobile, right? Awesome. That's what I have to share for today. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/PeterPME. Same with GitHub, PeterPME, all the way across the board. And if you're interested, check out DraftBit. Despite everything going on in the world, DraftBit is still hiring. If you're interested in the space, if you're into visual programming, right, I still consider that programming. Whether or not you're typing code or doing something, there's still this whole thought process behind it, right? So please reach out. We're hiring. And hopefully folks like this idea with Notion. So I wanted to try something different. Hopefully you all didn't hate me for it. But I put together my presentation in Notion. I figured since we're all virtual, right, it might be a little easier for me for doing demos and embedding things. So I'm sure I'll see in the YouTube comments whether you like it or not. It's easily, you can thumbs down it or, tweet something really bad or whatever. But I'll know. And that way I'll know never to do it again. Anyway, I'm going to share this link with all of you. There's plenty to learn from here. I'll put a lot of links in here for Reason React, Reverie, React Native Web, React Native Windows, Crossy Road, Onivim, even the React Native TV OS, which I didn't talk about. But anyway, thank you so much again for having me. I can't wait to see everybody in person once this is all over. Until then, see you later. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the second part of the QA. We've got all the speakers back again for another one. So please, if you've got any questions, ask them in the chat. Thank you, Peter, for that amazing talk. That was really interesting to hear about. First of all, I'd just like to touch on how have you found the transition to Reason at DraftBit? How's that gone for you?
There were a couple road bumps along the way, right? The strong parts of Reason are sort of features that neither JavaScript or TypeScript support, right? So it was a little weird getting into the whole okay, what do you mean this needs to exist or it doesn't, right? But then after that all sort of clicked. It's been smooth sailing, and I know some folks may roll their eyes when I say this, but I do see Reason as a competitive advantage because you just write stuff and it works. You catch your compile errors. It's very fast. The types don't get in the way. So I'm very passionate now. I see the vision and I use it, and I strongly recommend everyone at least give it a shot. Do that one PR, introduce Reason into a TypeScript project. You get type safety on both sides and see what you think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was wondering also if you would just talk us through a little bit more about the rest of your tech stack at DraftBit. So I know you're using Expo, you're using Reason. What else does your tech stack look like there?
Yeah, so we use Reason ML on the client with Reason React, right, which is React for Reason. We use Apollo GraphQL. That's also written in Reason. We get nice type safety in our queries too. Our backend is written in TypeScript, right? So when folks think that I'm biased and say, "Oh, you've never given TypeScript a shot," it's no, I very well do, and I think every day folks seem to say, "Oh, this is super slow." But anyway, so we use TypeScript on the server, Postgres as our database. We host on Fly.io, which is a distributed on the edge hosting company. Check them out. They were recently a YC company. Very, very great scaling and hosting solution. Let's see. Yeah, we use a lot of state machines, and that's about it.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear that breadth of tech stack. So we've got one question from the previous talk in the chat, which I missed out. It says, how's the data analysis with AI and ML methods coming along? So this is on the COVID app.
It's coming along very, very well. I mean, neither Mike or I are part of the data science team, so we can only be very general about it. But the one thing I would say is do read our blog, covid.joinzoe.com/blog, where you do have quite a few updates. And the one thing we're trying to do right now is trying to predict purely on your symptoms if you have COVID or not. One of the things we found very, very early when doing research is that the official symptoms, which are, do you have cough and fever, are actually not very good predictor of whether you have COVID or not. There is, I think, about 6 groups of different symptoms, which was really a surprise. Different people have very different reaction to COVID. And actually, one of the main one, the best predictor so far, is something called anosmia, which is the loss of smell or taste. So 2/3 of the people that have confirmed COVID, as in they've been tested, and we know they have it, have that symptom, for example. So that's actually the best predictor. So there's a lot of research going on in the background, and quite a few papers either that have been published already or going to be published in the next few weeks. Plus this huge work that we're doing to try to have like a better model for predicting COVID. And it's not perfect, but we think we're making really, really good headways towards that.
Amazing. We got a question in the chat from Brian, who says, "What is next on the roadmap for DraftBit?"
Oh, exciting stuff. So what's next on the roadmap for DraftBit? Better data integrations, right? A lot of folks are asking for things like Firebase, GraphQL, right? We support REST right now really, really well, but now we have to work on that. Another feature that is super exciting is passing data between screens. It's such an easy task to do when you're writing code, a little trickier when you're trying to do it visually. So we're in the final testings of that, and then we'll be at the point where you could build a fully fledged mobile app, start to finish without having to do any custom code logic, which is super exciting. Something else that folks have been asking about is authentication, whether it's like Firebase or Facebook or Google Sign-In, right? Being able to just throw that in there. A lot of the times we spend time coding these things, right? And it's always different, right? As somebody who's written a lot of OAuth implementations, I never seem to reuse the implementation that I've written, right? And the nice part about what DraftBit offers is I can just sort of drag and drop the button, right? And I don't really care about the implementation under the hood anymore because it just works, right? And at that point, it's well, it works, and I can see what the code generates, so that's it. So that's another big one. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, drag and drop OAuth, that would be a real game changer there.
Yeah, I know, right?
The real future. We've got another question in the chat here about state machines. So you mentioned state machines. What library are you using for that? And how are you using them?
So right now, David K. Piano's XState is really, really cool, right? It helps us visualize how we need to tackle a problem. That's something that we've been using from a planning perspective. Otherwise, a lot of the times too, we just sort of hand roll the implementation too. There's been a new state machine library written in Reason that I've been particularly excited about. Haven't used it yet, but going to see how we can take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question here for the first app, which is, do you have plans to expand the app to other countries to collect data with greater demographic diversity in the patients?
So the short answer is probably not. We would love to, but there are 2 difficulties. The first one is, again, as I said, Zoe's business is not about supporting the COVID-19 symptom tracker, and releasing in a new country actually takes quite a lot of effort and a lot of time. There's obviously, translating the app, but then, there are plenty of other aspects because every single country has different rules, and therefore that's something you need to take into consideration. And the second thing is actually the legal aspect. basically. Extending to other country means we basically also extend our footprint in terms of legal aspect we need to cover, and that's really hard. So if we have any country that reach out to us, group of universities or government are super keen and want to facilitate that, I will definitely listen to them. There is one specific where that's actually happening, so that's one possibility. But overall, we're not trying to expand ourselves. It's basically if someone reach out, we'll try to do it, but not otherwise.
That's really interesting. Another one for you here, Peter. You touched briefly on consoles as targets for React Native, like PlayStation, Xbox, Switch. Do you think it's possible or likely?
Yeah, absolutely. So React Native for Windows actually supports the Xbox and any sort of platform on the Universal Windows platform. I think so. I did bring up the PlayStation. I think there is a development. I think Sony actually does use React Native for some of their things. Don't quote me on that. It's just not something that I've pursued. But definitely when it comes to like Xbox, that is a possibility.
That's really interesting. It'd be really interesting to see that in the future, getting that cross-platform. Another thing is, it's kind of like in your road and building draft bit. What was the hardest thing you had to overcome, or hardest bug that you had to fix? Biggest challenge?
Oh man, there's plenty. So the sad reality of building DraftBit is that it's not your typical CRUD app, right? Like we are building a platform that builds apps, and coming from this like fast-moving engineering environment that I'm used to, the reality of it was we ship things and things break, right? And that's where we sort of got the stability on the reason side, right? The hardest parts are, the compiler, right? How do we get this code to generate the way that we need to dynamically? Another part is like, how do we sync your code? So we use like Expo's live preview, and like our web servers talk to Expo's web servers, which talk to your phone, right? Sometimes there's like a delay between what you click and what you see, right? How can we improve that experience? And lastly, some of just like the app building logic, right? Like, how do we dumb down such a complex thing, right? Like being able to move in an onboarding experience, let's just say you've got 5 screens, right? Like what's your first name, what's your email, what's your phone number, right? Going through those things that you have to think about is like, where do I hold the state for all these things, right? Do I save it? Do I make a request on every page, right? Are those decisions up to the user building the app, or do we make those decisions for you, right? So I know I answered the question in a variety of different ways, but those are all problems that we sort of, try to tackle on a daily basis. And we're hiring too, if you like, complex stuff like that.
It's not an easy question to answer. Of course, there's going to be a wide range of problems. So another question for you here is, what kind of cloud-based infrastructure the generated code is compatible with?
Arguably everything, right? So because we do strive in making sure that the code is readable and written like a senior level engineer, there's nothing stopping you from using any service. Like I mentioned, like right now we support REST, but GraphQL and stuff like Firebase basically opens that up for any type of infrastructure, right? Like with REST, if you come from a traditional REST background, you plug in, play your endpoints, and that works. The exciting thing with GraphQL is having our Explorer. So we run an introspection query on your GraphQL database, figure out all the different points, and then all you have to do is click to build those queries, right? And then DraftBit takes it from there. We handle all the boilerplate of loading error states and all the likes there.
So another question in chat for you. It's a bit of a challenge as well. So you mentioned it's so easy to build one app. Is there a link that demos a new beta app being built in 10 minutes or under?
No, but I actually passed this off to marketing, and we should totally do this. So it's not out yet, but you can. But we'll have that for you soon. I'll come up with, maybe I'll like rebuild like Instagram or like a simple version of it, and then you can see it for yourself.
Amazing. Well, it looks like that's the questions there. Thank you so much, all 3 of you, Peter, Mike, and Julian, for joining us this evening. It's been great having you on for these talks, and thank you again to Pusher for hosting us. Hopefully we'll see you all next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kevin.